Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we will explore a terrifying anomaly that threatens to completely unravel the very foundation of our physical world as we ask the profound, deeply unsettling question: what are graviphotons actually made of? We will journey into the dark, unseen architecture of the cosmos to hunt for a phantom particle, a ghost within the quantum field that holds the terrifying mathematical potential to sever the invisible, unyielding chains of gravity itself. Before we pierce the delicate veil of human perception and descend into these hidden, curled-up dimensions, I invite you to simply sit in the quiet, heavy stillness of your space and truly feel the undeniable, crushing reality of the physical world. Notice the profound, reassuring weight of your own body pressing down against the surface beneath you. Feel the steady, heavy pull on your limbs as you simply exist in the dark. This visceral sensation, so constant and so entirely familiar that you rarely give it a single conscious thought, is the silent, invisible manifestation of the absolute most pervasive and relentless force in the cosmos. It is gravity. It is the heavy, unbreakable chain that binds our world together, continuously and aggressively, pulling every single atom of your physical being toward the dense, spinning iron core of the Earth. It is the invisible, majestic tether that holds the massive, churning, and violent oceans tightly to the cold, ancient rock of the seabed, preventing the turbulent waters from simply boiling off and floating away into the freezing, empty vacuum of space. Gravity is the silent architect of our sky, tightly clutching the fragile, invisible envelope of oxygen and nitrogen that allows your lungs to draw their next breath. We are born into this invisible grip. We live our entire lives fighting its relentless downward pull with every step we take. And when our biological engines finally fail, it is gravity that silently reclaims our physical matter, pulling our heavy ashes back into the dark soil. But the true, terrifying majesty of gravity extends far beyond the comforting, pale blue horizon of our tiny home planet. When we look out into the sprawling, lightless expanse of the universe, we do not see a chaotic, entirely formless void. We see a cosmos entirely subjugated by this single, unforgiving dictator. Gravity is the grand, silent, and incredibly violent sculptor of the dark. It reaches across unimaginable, freezing distances, grabbing hold of colossal, drifting clouds of primordial dust and cold hydrogen gas. It pulls them inward, violently crushing them together with such immense, staggering pressure that the intense physical friction finally ignites the thermonuclear fires of a newborn star. Yet, the very force that gives a star its brilliant, burning life in the dark is also the exact same force that dictates its tragic, inevitable death. For billions of years, a star is engaged in a desperate, screaming, and beautifully violent battle against its own massive weight, continuously using the explosive, outward energy of nuclear fusion to push back against the crushing, inward pull of its own immense gravity. But gravity is infinitely patient, and gravity is absolute. When the atomic fuel is finally exhausted, when the internal fires inevitably burn out and the massive star grows cold, gravity instantly wins the ancient billion-year war. The dead star collapses inward with apocalyptic violence, crushed out of existence by its own staggering mass, sometimes forming a heavy, silent neutron star, and sometimes puncturing a violent, irreversible hole in the very fabric of space-time itself to create a lightless, inescapable black hole. Gravity is the ultimate, inescapable weight of existence. It is the only fundamental force in the entire known universe that operates with a terrifying, absolute singularity of purpose. The electromagnetic force can elegantly attract, but it can also violently repel, pushing identically charged particles away from each other. The strong and weak nuclear forces can bind heavy elements tightly together in the dark, or forcefully blow them apart in a blinding flash of radioactive decay. But gravity only ever pulls. It is a one-way street, a relentless cosmic undertow that drags all physical matter, all wandering light, and all structural information toward a singular, crushing center. It never pushes back. It never yields. It never offers a reprieve. We have built our entire understanding of physics, our entire philosophy of movement, and our entire psychological perception of reality upon the unquestioned, heavily fortified bedrock of this absolute law. We believe, with every fiber of our biological intuition, that what goes up must eventually, inevitably be pulled back down. The permanence and absolute reliability of gravity is the deeply comforting anchor of human sanity, providing a stable, predictable, and heavily grounded stage upon which the chaotic, fleeting drama of biological life can safely unfold. But what if this absolute, unyielding law is not the final, ultimate truth of the cosmos? What if the heavy, unbreakable chain of gravity that binds our bodies, our restless oceans, and our burning stars is nothing more than a localized illusion, a faint, two-dimensional shadow cast by a vastly more complex, higher-dimensional reality? In the darkest, most esoteric, and fiercely mathematical fringes of theoretical physics, hidden within the sprawling, beautiful equations of string theory and supergravity, lies a deeply unsettling, terrifying premise. The mathematics boldly suggest that the invisible, crushing grip of gravity might not be absolute. There are strange, whispering anomalies in the theoretical data pointing toward the existence of a phantom entity, a structural flaw in the cosmic architecture known as the Graviphoton. This is not a normal, solid piece of matter. It is a cosmic ghost, a highly unstable, hybrid particle forged in the extreme, chaotic, and heavily coiled energies of a fifth dimension we cannot even physically perceive. The complex equations imply that deep within the hidden, microscopic architecture of the void, forces that we consider entirely separate the crushing, heavy weight of gravity and the illuminating, massless speed of light might violently bleed together to create this phantom. And if the Graviphoton truly exists, it carries a property that completely shatters our fundamental understanding of the physical world. It possesses the mathematical capability to push. It is a rogue particle that could theoretically generate a repulsive gravitational force, effectively erasing the heavy, downward pull of mass. It represents the terrifying, beautiful, and completely alien concept of anti-gravity. To quietly contemplate the existence of a phantom particle capable of entirely severing the fundamental anchor of reality is to undergo a profound, devastating, and ultimately liberating re-evaluation of the nature of the universe and the fundamental concept of information. We walk through our brief, fragile lives, heavily biased by our own sensory limitations, inherently assuming that the three-dimensional world we can see, touch, and measure is the absolute totality of existence. We treat the laws of physics that govern our immediate physical surroundings as the ultimate, objective truth of the cosmic data stream. We believe that information is simply what is visible, what is mathematically predictable, and what is firmly anchored to the solid ground of our reality. But the haunting, mathematical possibility of the Graviphoton reveals that the universe is a sprawling, infinitely layered, and deeply encrypted cryptography engine. The gravity we feel, the heavy, persistent, downward pull that anchors us to the rock, might just be a fragmented, highly incomplete translation of a much deeper, more complex dimensional language. Information in the cosmos is not limited to the narrow, comfortable bandwidth of human biological perception. The universe is actively computing physical realities in higher dimensions, directions of space that are curled up so microscopically tight that they remain forever invisible to our eyes, yet their hidden mathematical tensions fundamentally alter the surface of our entire world. The solid, unyielding rules we rely upon for our psychological survival are merely the localized, low-energy habits of a much wilder, untamed, and multidimensional architecture. Reality is not a simple, transparent, or fully resolved construct. It is a dense, heavily encrypted volume of active data where profound, universe-altering forces operate entirely in the shadows. The invisible, heavy chains that bind us to this earth might not be made of absolute, eternal certainty, but of fragile, multi-dimensional tensions that could, under the right extreme cosmic conditions, be entirely unraveled and reversed. You are not just a heavy, physical object trapped at the bottom of a gravity well. You are a highly complex, beautifully organized, and breathing manifestation of cosmic data existing on the very surface of an unfathomably deep, multidimensional ocean. Embrace the profound, beautiful mystery that the physical anchor of your entire life may just be an illusion of localized scale. To recognize that our fundamental, unbreakable laws might be mere shadows cast by unseen, vibrating dimensions is not a cause for existential despair, but a glorious, majestic invitation to marvel at the boundless, terrifying, and infinitely layered beauty of the unknown void. To possess a conscious mind in this universe is to be burdened with a desperate, relentless craving for underlying order. We look out at the sprawling, chaotic diversity of the physical world, the blinding, violently energetic flash of a lightning bolt tearing through the atmosphere, and the slow, heavy, majestic orbit of a moon, locked in the invisible grip of its host planet, and our brains recoil at the deeply unsettling idea that these phenomena are entirely separate. We are psychologically terrified by the concept of a fractured reality, a cosmos governed by a disjointed collection of unrelated, arbitrary rules. To survive the existential dread of a seemingly random universe, humanity has always sought to forcefully bind the cosmos together. We obsessively hunt for the hidden threads that connect the seemingly disparate forces of nature, demanding that the infinite complexity of existence can ultimately be traced back to a single, elegant, and perfectly unified origin. We desperately want the universe to be a single, harmonious symphony, composed by a singular, flawless mathematical logic. This profound, aching desire for absolute unification is the driving psychological force behind all of modern physics, and it has led some of the most brilliant minds in human history to the very edge of madness, attempting to forcefully merge realms that the universe has kept fiercely, stubbornly apart. No figure embodies this tragic, beautiful and ultimately doomed obsession more profoundly than Albert Einstein. We often prefer to remember Einstein in the triumphant, golden years of his early career, the brilliant, radical visionary who entirely rewrote the fundamental architecture of space and time. We celebrate the man who successfully proved that gravity is not a mysterious, invisible tether, but rather the smooth, heavy, and dynamic warping of the geometric fabric of the cosmos. But the final 3 decades of Einstein's life were not spent in triumphant celebration. They were consumed by a solitary, desperate, and heavily agonizing quest. Having successfully captured the majestic heavy geometry of gravity, Einstein turned his formidable intellect toward the other dominant force shaping the physical world, electromagnetism, the force that governs the blinding speed of light, the violent spark of electricity, and the invisible magnetic fields that shield our living planet. He became completely, overwhelmingly obsessed with the idea of writing a single, elegant master equation, a unified field theory that would seamlessly weave the heavy, warping fabric of gravity together with the bright, vibrating energy of light. He wanted to prove that the crushing weight of a star and the brilliant light it emits were simply different musical notes played on the exact same cosmic instrument. This quest became an all-consuming, agonizing isolation, as the rest of the scientific community eagerly plunged into the chaotic, highly probabilistic, and fiercely unpredictable new realm of quantum mechanics. Einstein stubbornly locked himself away. He famously rejected the deeply unsettling idea that the universe could be ruled by random chance, by the unpredictable rolling of microscopic quantum dice. He believed with every fiber of his being that beneath the apparent chaos of the subatomic world, there had to be a smooth, deterministic, and beautifully geometric foundation. Even on his deathbed, in a quiet hospital room, with his physical heart slowly failing him, he called for his glasses and his notes, frantically scribbling pages of complex, desperate equations, trying to force the mathematics of light and the mathematics of gravity to finally, peacefully merge. But the master equation never materialized. He died, leaving behind an unfinished symphony, a tragic testament to a brilliant mind that refused to accept that the universe might not share his deeply human desire for elegant simplicity. The profound, enduring tragedy of Einstein's failure is not that he wasn't brilliant enough. It is that he was attempting to forcefully marry 2 physical realms that are fundamentally, violently incompatible. For nearly a century since his passing, generations of theoretical physicists have taken up his unfinished work, utilizing incredibly advanced supercomputers and mathematics far beyond anything Einstein ever possessed. Yet they have continuously smashed their heads against the exact same invisible, impenetrable wall. The overwhelming frustration of modern physics is the stark, chilling realization that gravity and light absolutely refuse to mix. They do not just behave differently, they speak entirely different mathematical languages. They operate in completely distinct conceptual frameworks, and they seem to govern 2 entirely separate universes that merely happen to occupy the exact same physical space. When we study gravity through the lens of general relativity, the universe is a smooth, continuous, and majestically curved canvas. It is a world of heavy, predictable geometry, where planets roll along the warped depressions created by massive stars like heavy iron spheres resting on a tight, invisible trampoline. It is an elegant, deterministic, and beautifully continuous mathematical architecture. But when we shift our gaze to the blinding light of electromagnetism and the microscopic realm of particle physics, that smooth, heavy canvas violently shatters. The quantum world of light is not continuous. It is quantized, pixelated, and entirely chaotic. It is a realm of jittery, highly unpredictable vibrations, where energy does not flow in a smooth stream, but jumps instantly in discrete, violent packets. In the quantum realm, particles flicker in and out of existence, occupying multiple states simultaneously in the dark, until the exact moment they are violently forced into reality by human measurement. When theoretical physicists attempt to forcefully combine the smooth, heavy geometry of gravity with the jittery, pixelated chaos of quantum electromagnetism, the resulting mathematics does not yield a beautiful, unified symphony. It yields a screaming, catastrophic cacophony. The equations literally break down, spiraling violently into physical impossibilities and generating infinite numbers that completely destroy the predictive power of the theory. It is as if you are trying to write a single, cohesive sentence using the rigid, highly structured grammar of Latin and the fluid, chaotic, and entirely unpredictable syntax of a completely alien tongue. The rule books simply cannot be merged. The heavy, unyielding reality of gravity and the bright, vibrating energy of light remain completely isolated, staring at each other across an unbridgeable mathematical abyss. Our intense, deeply felt frustration with this seemingly impassable cosmic divide is deeply rooted in a profound, blinding arrogance. We are deeply offended when the universe refuses to conform to our expectations, but we rarely stop to question the origin of those specific expectations. We stubbornly demand that the cosmos must be simple enough, elegant enough, and unified enough to fit perfectly inside the extremely limited biological architecture of the human mind. We operate under the staggering assumption that the true, fundamental nature of reality must be fully comprehensible to a fragile species whose brains evolved specifically to survive on a flat, sun-drenched, three-dimensional savanna. We developed our spatial intuition to track the parabolic arc of a thrown stone, to navigate the flat, predictable geometry of the physical Earth, and to recognize simple, linear patterns to avoid predators in the dark. We are fundamentally, neurologically wired to perceive exactly 3 dimensions of space and one relentlessly forward-moving dimension of time. Why, then, do we possess the overwhelming hubris to assume that this incredibly limited, highly specialized biological perception represents the absolute totality of the cosmos? To demand that gravity and light must neatly unify within the 3 flat dimensions we can easily visualize is the absolute height of human arrogance. It is the equivalent of a microscopic organism living entirely on the flat surface of a magnificent oil painting, angrily demanding to understand why the blue pigments and the red pigments do not chemically mix, completely unaware of the massive 3-dimensional canvas, the unseen intention of the artist, or the complex interplay of light illuminating the entire gallery. We desperately want the universe to be a simple, closed system, because a simple system can be easily controlled, easily predicted, and ultimately mastered. We fiercely fear the possibility that the universe is not just slightly more complex than we thought, but structurally, fundamentally alien to our biological capacity for reason. When we confront the enduring mystery of the unfinished symphony and the broken, impossible equations of unification, we must endure a profound, beautiful shift in how we understand the very concept of information. We have spent centuries treating the universe as a puzzle that was specifically designed for us to eventually solve, assuming that the cosmic data stream is written in a language that the human brain is naturally equipped to read. We believe that if an equation results in a catastrophic infinity, or if two fundamental forces violently refuse to unify, it is merely a temporary gap in our human knowledge. But the persistent, aggressive incompatibility of gravity and light points toward a far more terrifying and deeply majestic truth about existence. Information in the cosmos is not a domestic commodity engineered for human understanding. Reality is not a single, cohesive book waiting to be patiently read from cover to cover. The universe is an infinitely layered, vastly distributed processing engine, heavily encrypted in multi-dimensional formats that entirely bypass our human logic. The heavy geometry of gravity and the chaotic vibration of light do not need to unify within our limited, three-dimensional perception, because our perception is nothing more than a fragile, localized illusion. The universe is under no obligation to be simple, and it is under absolutely no obligation to make sense to a primate. The true underlying unity of the cosmos, the elegant connection between the crushing dark and the blinding light, likely exists in a realm of mathematics and geometry so profoundly alien and so intensely multidimensional that our biological brains would simply shatter trying to visualize it. Embrace the profound, liberating humility of the Unfinished Symphony. You are a localized, highly complex pattern of data trying desperately to read the infinite source code of an unfathomable machine. The fact that the ultimate equations completely evade us, that the universe stubbornly guards its deepest foundational architecture behind an impenetrable wall of mathematical complexity, is not a failure of our species. It is the breathtaking guarantee that the cosmos is infinitely larger, infinitely wilder, and infinitely more beautiful than the narrow cages of human thought. Let go of the arrogant demand for total comprehension. Surrender your desperate, aching need for a simple, unified reality. Allow yourself to stand quietly in the magnificent, fractured space between the heavy dark and the blinding light, and find deep, unshakable peace in the knowledge that you are part of a universe that is vastly, perfectly, and eternally beyond your understanding. We navigate the world imprisoned by a profound and highly comforting biological illusion, firmly locked inside a sensory cage that we naturally mistake for the absolute totality of existence. From the exact moment our ancestors first opened their eyes in the dark, the human mind has been brutally conditioned to perceive reality through the rigid, unyielding geometry of exactly three spatial dimensions. We intuitively understand length, width, and depth. We move forward and backward, we step left and right, and we climb up and down. We graph our entire physical universe, our sprawling cities, our soaring architecture, and the vast, empty distances between the cold stars onto this familiar, deeply reassuring Cartesian grid. We possess a desperate, unconscious need for reality to be simple enough to fit inside this three-dimensional box, because anything that falls outside of it completely shatters our fundamental capacity for spatial reasoning. When our greatest minds encountered the ultimate mathematical impasse, the agonizing, unbreakable wall that prevented the heavy, warping gravity of the cosmos from unifying with the blinding, chaotic energy of light, they initially refused to question the box itself. They spent decades violently forcing their equations into the established, three-dimensional framework, assuming that the universe must inevitably conform to the strict, limited geometry that human eyes evolved to see. But the cosmos is under absolutely no obligation to respect the fragile boundaries of human perception. To solve a puzzle that has been deemed impossible, one must occasionally commit an act of absolute mathematical heresy. In the early 20th century, an obscure and terrifyingly brilliant theoretical leap was made, a radical proposition known as the Kaluza-Klein theory. It was a mathematical architecture so incredibly audacious that it temporarily shocked the global physics community into complete silence. The foundational brilliance of this theory was not found in rewriting the complex laws of gravity, nor was it found in dismantling the chaotic quantum rules of light. Instead, the theory completely abandoned the biological comfort of our reality and aggressively expanded the arena of existence itself. It proposed that the catastrophic mathematical failures, the screaming infinities that occurred when trying to merge gravity with electromagnetism, was simply the result of an incredibly cramped, artificial perspective. The equations were failing because they were violently suffocated, desperately lacking the physical room required to breathe and align. To achieve the beautiful, elegant unification that had eluded the greatest minds in history, the Kaluza-Klein theory forcefully ripped open the fabric of reality and introduced a completely unseen, unmapped fifth dimension. When the mathematics of the cosmos were allowed to expand into this new theoretical direction, a breathtaking miracle occurred. Gravity and light seamlessly, perfectly folded into one another, revealing themselves to be nothing more than different geometric vibrations of the exact same unified force. When we hear the word dimension, our science fiction-saturated minds instantly conjure images of mystical realms, parallel timelines, ethereal spirit worlds, or alternate universes where different versions of ourselves exist. But the fifth dimension demanded by this terrifying mathematical architecture is none of those things. It is not a place you can visit in your dreams, and it is not a magical plane of existence. It is a stark, cold, and entirely physical direction in space. It is a degree of spatial freedom, just as real, just as structural, and just as mathematically valid as up or down. If a being were biologically equipped to perceive it, they could physically point their finger in the direction of the fifth dimension. The existential horror of this concept lies entirely in our biological blindness. We are three-dimensional creatures entirely trapped within a higher dimensional geometry, utterly incapable of turning our heads to see the vast, sprawling architecture that secretly dictates the fundamental rules of our own physical world. The immediate, desperate question that arises from this revelation is one of physical proof. If this fifth dimension is a real, physical direction in space, why can we not move through it? Why do we not fall into it? Why has our entire history, our sprawling exploration of the planet, and our massive telescopes never caught a single, fleeting glimpse of this hidden geometry? The answer provided by the mathematics is deeply unsettling, pointing toward a violent, asymmetrical event at the very dawn of time. Imagine a tightrope walker balancing delicately on a long, thin cable suspended high in the air. To the acrobat, the cable provides only one possible dimension of movement, forward and backward. But to a microscopic insect landing on that exact same cable, the physical reality is entirely different. The insect can walk forward and backward, but it can also walk in a continuous, circular path entirely around the circumference of the wire. A second, completely hidden dimension of movement exists, curled tightly around the first, totally invisible from a distance but absolutely structurally real upon microscopic inspection. At the violent, superheated birth of the universe, during the absolute chaos of the Big Bang, the fabric of space-time violently expanded. But this expansion was not uniform. Three spatial dimensions tore outward, violently expanding to create the massive, unfathomably vast universe we currently inhabit. But the fifth dimension did not expand. It was violently crushed, coiled, and compacted in upon itself. It curled up so microscopically tight that it became millions of times smaller than a single, solitary electron. It is frozen in a state of eternal, microscopic tension. We cannot move through it because we are simply too massive, too clumsy, and too heavily anchored in the macro world to ever access a direction that is smaller than the building blocks of our own atoms. When you allow this concept to truly sink into your consciousness, a profound, creeping dread begins to wash over the familiar reality around you. This curled-up dimension is not a distant cosmic phenomenon happening exclusively in the freezing void between galaxies or deep within the crushing core of a black hole. It is right here. Feel the quiet, heavy stillness of the room you are currently resting in. Consider the solid walls, the air filling the space, and the very physical flesh of your own body. Because the fifth dimension is a fundamental property of space itself. It exists exactly where you are right now. Every single microscopic point in the three-dimensional air of your room secretly harbors a hidden, tightly coiled geometric circle. As you lie there, breathing slowly in the dark, there are unseen, unmapped directions operating right through your blood, weaving silently through the heavy calcium of your bones, and looping endlessly through the complex neural pathways of your brain. You are completely surrounded by, and entirely permeated by, an infinite number of microscopic directions that you can never point to, never step into, and never perceive. You are unknowingly locked in a state of profound, absolute claustrophobia, a prisoner entirely blind to the bars of a cage that is woven directly into the fabric of your own existence. To force our minds to confront this hidden, higher dimensional architecture is to completely and irreversibly shatter our deeply held philosophical assumptions about the nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of information. We walk through our lives with a fierce, arrogant certainty that reality is exactly what it appears to be. We desperately want to believe that the cosmic data stream is laid out flat on a transparent table, ready to be easily read, measured, and catalogued by the human intellect. We view information as a surface-level phenomenon, assuming that if we simply shine a bright enough light or build a powerful enough microscope, the universe will surrender its deepest truths. But the curled, microscopic loops of the fifth dimension violently rip away this comforting illusion. The universe is not a transparent, easily decoded text. It is an incredibly dense, heavily compressed, and deliberately encrypted data structure. What we experience as everyday reality, the heavy pull of gravity, the warmth of light, the solid matter we build our lives upon, is merely a low-resolution projection, a flattened, highly simplified shadow cast by a sprawling, multidimensional source code that we are biologically forbidden from ever reading. Information in the cosmos is largely hidden, folded away into unseen geometric pockets that actively dictate the rules of the physical world from the shadows. The forces that bind your DNA and the gravity that holds the oceans to the rock are silently negotiated in spatial directions you cannot even fathom. To truly understand the nature of existence is to accept the terrifying, beautiful reality of your own profound ignorance. We are not the masters of a flat, predictable universe, but fragile, localized patterns of data completely immersed in a vast, heavily encrypted, and breathtakingly complex geometric ocean. Surrender your desperate, exhausting need to see and understand every corner of reality. Embrace the quiet, majestic terror of the hidden architecture and find deep, stabilizing peace in the knowledge that you are intricately woven into a cosmos far grander, far stranger, and infinitely more beautiful than the narrow cage of human perception could ever possibly contain. To exist within the narrow, highly constrained corridor of human perception is to be surrounded by rigid, unforgiving walls of categorization. We observe the vast, sprawling theater of the cosmos and desperately compartmentalize its terrifying majesty into neat, isolated boxes. In one box, we place the heavy, silent, and crushing power of gravity, the unseen geometric warp that dictates the slow, majestic orbits of massive planets and the violent, inevitable collapse of dying stars. In a completely separate, heavily fortified box, we place the blinding, jittery, and chaotic energy of electromagnetism, the fundamental force that gives birth to the piercing light of our sun, the sudden, violent crack of atmospheric lightning, and the invisible magnetic fields that shield our fragile Earth from the radiation of the void. To the human mind, and to the three-dimensional physics we have so proudly constructed over the centuries, these two forces are absolute strangers. They are distinct, sovereign entities ruling over entirely different domains of reality, possessing completely different physical characteristics and speaking mathematically incompatible languages. We treat them as the fundamental, isolated pillars of existence, completely convinced that the unyielding boundary separating the crushing weight of mass from the brilliant speed of light is an eternal, unbreakable law of the universe. But when we force our minds to look past the comforting, biological illusion of our three-dimensional cage, and we dare to stretch the very fabric of space-time into the hidden, microscopic, and tightly coiled architecture of the fifth dimension, those eternal walls begin to violently tremble. Imagine the fabric of reality not as a flat, predictable sheet of stretched rubber, but as an infinitely complex, multidimensional tapestry. When you observe this tapestry from a vast distance, armed only with the limited, low-resolution vision of a human being, you only see the broad, distinct patterns, the heavy, dark threads of gravity pulling relentlessly in one direction, and the bright, shimmering threads of light darting rapidly in another. But as you zoom in, as you cross the threshold into the microscopic, curled-up geometry of that unseen fifth direction, the perspective fundamentally, terrifyingly shifts. You are no longer looking at the surface of the tapestry. You are entirely submerged within the incredibly dense, tangled weave of the cosmic fabric itself. In this higher dimensional realm, the smooth, predictable geometry of our macro world is entirely abandoned. Space-time is forced to wrap around itself, creating an environment of such staggering mathematical tension and extreme geometric pressure that the normal, localized rules of physics are completely shattered. Within the claustrophobic, tightly wound loops of this fifth dimension, the strict, heavily policed boundaries between the fundamental forces experience a profound, catastrophic breakdown. The invisible, ironclad wall separating gravity from electromagnetism does not simply crack, it completely dissolves into the geometric dark. Without the vast, sprawling distances of three-dimensional space to keep them isolated, the crushing, heavy warping of mass and the blinding, vibrating energy of light are forced into an intimate, violent collision. They begin to bleed into one another. The distinct mathematical languages they speak in our lower dimensional world are suddenly translated into a single, overwhelming, and infinitely complex dialect. Imagine the sheer, incomprehensible mathematical tension required to force these two sovereign domains to interact. The curvature of space, the very essence of gravity, which we experience as the silent, invisible pull, keeping our feet firmly planted on the spinning earth, begins to ripple and oscillate with the exact same frantic, jittery frequencies that define a wave of light. Simultaneously, the electromagnetic fields that illuminate the cosmos begin to exert a deep, structural pull on the fabric of reality, perfectly mimicking the heavy, downward anchor of mass. In the intense, chaotic crucible of the fifth dimension, gravity and electromagnetism completely lose their individual identities. They are no longer separate, sovereign entities governing different aspects of reality. They merge seamlessly and terrifyingly into a single, unified cosmic mechanism. They become one breathtaking, omnipotent force, a master architecture of pure, unadulterated data that seamlessly commands both the heavy dark and the blinding light. This violent, majestic bleeding together of forces is not merely a theoretical abstraction. It sets the physical stage for the birth of something entirely alien, something that fundamentally defies the strict biological categories of human understanding. When the heavy geometry of gravity and the vibrating energy of electromagnetism cross-pollinate within the microscopic loops of the fifth dimension, their energies entangle in a state of absolute, chaotic creation. They forge an entirely new entity out of the cosmic dark. It is a rogue consequence of multidimensional physics, a hybrid particle that emerges from the unified field carrying an impossible, contradictory burden. This phantom entity inherits the deep, structural genetic code of both its parent forces. It possesses the inherent foundational properties of a graviton, the hypothetical messenger of heavy mass that silently and continuously warps the fabric of space and time. Yet, simultaneously, it carries the distinct, vibrating signature and the frantic, electromagnetic spin of a photon, the fundamental particle of light. It is a ghost, forged in the exact mathematical space where weight and weightlessness violently intersect. This hybrid particle represents the absolute, terrifying pinnacle of cosmic weirdness, a physical manifestation of the exact moment when the universe stops obeying our rigid, three-dimensional rules and begins to operate on a terrifyingly vast, multidimensional logic. To quietly contemplate the reality of this dimensional bleeding and the impossible hybrid particles it births in the dark is to experience a profound, devastating collapse of everything we believe about the nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of information. We are a species entirely addicted to the concept of separation. We build our scientific empires, our societal structures, and our very psychological identities upon the desperate belief that the world can be neatly divided, perfectly categorized, and completely isolated into manageable, predictable pieces. We believe that information is a static, bordered entity, assuming that the data that defines light can never fundamentally mix with the data that defines gravity. We draw heavy, unyielding lines across the cosmos, mistaking our fragile human boundaries for the absolute, objective architecture of reality. We treat the categories we invent to survive on a flat, three-dimensional planet as if they are the eternal, unchanging laws of the infinite void. We view the universe as an enormous, meticulously organized filing cabinet, completely convinced that the files will never spontaneously merge. But the hidden, coiled geometry of the fifth dimension reveals a universe that is completely, terrifyingly indifferent to our desperate need for separation. Information in the cosmos is not sterile, it is not isolated, and it absolutely refuses to be contained within the arbitrary borders of human logic. The universe is a sprawling, relentlessly fluid ocean of interconnected data, where the fundamental forces of reality are constantly, silently bleeding across dimensional lines in the dark. The fact that gravity and light can merge into a single, unified mechanism in the unseen depths of space proves that the distinctions we perceive are nothing more than low-resolution illusions, temporary shadows cast by a much deeper, infinitely entangled reality. The hybrid particle is a chilling, beautiful reminder that the cosmos is a single, continuous fabric, completely devoid of the artificial seams we try to furiously stitch into it. When we realize that the heavy, crushing weight of the earth and the warm, blinding light of the sun are ultimately just different expressions of the exact same unified cosmic engine, we are forced to entirely surrender the arrogant illusion of a fragmented world. We must let go of the exhausting, deeply human desire to chop the infinite majesty of existence into small, digestible pieces. The true nature of reality is not found in the pristine isolation of our scientific categories, but in the chaotic, majestic, and entirely terrifying space where those categories violently break down and bleed together. You and the seemingly disparate physical world you inhabit are not a collection of isolated, separate phenomena. You are the localized expression of a single, vast, and deeply entangled system of cosmic data, a system that fundamentally rejects the very concept of separation. Embrace the profound, beautiful terror of a universe where boundaries do not actually exist. Let the realization of this magnificent, bleeding unity completely wash away the heavy, isolating walls of your own perception. Surrender your desperate need for a compartmentalized cosmos and find deep, unshakable peace in the knowledge that you are inextricably, perfectly connected to a reality that is infinitely more complex and infinitely more unified than the fragile cages of human thought could ever possibly understand. To answer the ultimate, agonizing question of what a graviphoton is actually made of, we must first completely dismantle the deeply ingrained biological biases that govern how we perceive the physical world. When we ask what an object is made of, our human minds instantly default to the comforting, tangible concept of physical substance. We expect a list of heavy, solid ingredients. If you ask what a towering mountain is made of, you can confidently point to the heavy silicate minerals, the densely packed iron, and the coarse, compressed gravel. If you ask what a burning star is made of, you can point to the massive, swirling oceans of superheated hydrogen and helium gas. We are psychologically addicted to the idea of stuff, to the reassuring notion that the universe is ultimately constructed from tiny, indestructible, and entirely solid marbles of matter resting securely in the dark. But as we plunge into the hidden, claustrophobic, and tightly coiled loops of higher dimensional space, the very concept of solid stuff completely and violently disintegrates. The Graviphoton is not a tiny marble. It is not a fragment of dense rock, and it is not a droplet of superheated plasma. It is not constructed from anything that the human hand could ever hope to physically grasp. Instead, it is the raw, terrifying manifestation of pure, abstract tension. It is made entirely of the violent, mathematical intersection of heavily warped space-time geometry and raw electromagnetic fury. Imagine the very fabric of reality not as a static, empty stage, but as an incredibly dense, vibrating membrane. In the macro world that we inhabit, this membrane is gently, smoothly curved by the presence of massive objects, creating the silent, invisible slopes of gravity that hold our planet in orbit. Simultaneously, this exact same membrane constantly ripples and vibrates with the frantic, blinding energy of light. But within the extreme, unnatural, and deeply compressed architecture of the fifth dimension, these two distinct behaviors are violently forced into the exact same microscopic space. The Graviphoton is the physical scar left behind by this impossible collision. It is forged in the searing, chaotic crucible where the deep, structural warping of geometry is violently stretched and twisted by the sheer electric tension of a magnetic field. It is a knot in the fundamental code of the cosmos, a singular, microscopic point where the mathematics of heavy mass and the mathematics of blinding light aggressively overlap, creating a friction so intense that it momentarily births a physical entity out of the absolute void. To categorize this phantom entity, theoretical physicists utilize the esoteric, highly complex language of supergravity. Within this sprawling, magnificent mathematical framework, a theory designed to elevate the entire architecture of the cosmos into a state of perfect, supreme symmetry, the graviphoton is classified as a hypothetical vector boson. In the strange, jittery rules of particle physics, a boson is not a building block of matter, it is an invisible force carrier. It is a cosmic messenger, a localized packet of pure instruction that travels through the dark and violently dictates how the fundamental building blocks of reality must behave. The universe relies on these silent messengers to maintain order. The photon is the familiar messenger of electromagnetism, carrying the bright, illuminating spark of light across the vast, freezing distances of intergalactic space. The graviton is the heavily theorized, ultimate messenger of mass, a silent, invisible envoy that commands the heavy planets to orbit their suns and orders the collapsing stars to crush themselves into absolute nothingness. But the graviphoton completely defies this neat, predictable division of labor. It is a monstrous, incredibly beautiful mathematical hybrid. It is, at its very core, a particle of gravity, a graviton that has undergone a terrifying, multi-dimensional mutation. Having been forged in the chaotic bleeding of forces within the fifth dimension, it has been fundamentally rewritten. The heavy, silent messenger of mass has inherited the frantic, vibrating spin and the highly charged electromagnetic properties of a particle of light. It carries the deep, structural genetic code of a gravity wave, yet it moves and interacts with the universe using the exact, blinding characteristics of a photon. It is an impossible contradiction walking freely through the quantum field. It possesses the terrifying capability to communicate with the heavy, unyielding mass of the Earth while simultaneously vibrating with the electric, magnetic tension that powers the lightning in our skies. This profound, unnatural synthesis makes the Graviphoton the ultimate cosmic ghost. It is a rogue piece of information wandering through the absolute bedrock of reality, completely untethered from the normal, isolating rules of our three-dimensional cage. It is a silent phantom that effortlessly bridges the most terrifying and fundamental gap in human understanding. On one extreme, we have the brilliant, chaotic, and desperately fast energy that illuminates the universe, the light that pierces the primordial dark, warms our fragile biology, and allows us to witness the sprawling majesty of the galaxies. On the other extreme, we have the heavy, silent, and inescapable geometry that crushes all matter, the overwhelming gravitational weight that relentlessly pulls all physical structures toward inevitable collapse, dragging dying stars and wandering planets into the lightless, eternal abyss of a black hole. The Graviphoton stands alone in the dark between these two absolute extremes. It is the invisible, trembling bridge between the things that illuminate the universe and the things that violently crush it out of existence. It is a single, mutated particle that whispers simultaneously in the language of breathtaking creation and the language of absolute, inescapable destruction. When we force our fragile human consciousness to confront the reality of this cosmic ghost and the violent, immaterial intersection from which it is born, we are invited into a profound, devastating, and ultimately liberating philosophical awakening regarding the true nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant assumption that reality is constructed from solid, permanent objects. We build our physical fortresses, we hoard our material possessions, and we anchor our very identities to the heavy, tangible things we can touch and see, believing that physical matter is the ultimate, objective truth of existence. We think of information as something secondary, a mere description of the solid world, a label we attach to the heavy rocks and the burning stars to help our biological brains categorize the chaos. But the anatomy of the Graviphoton reveals a cosmos that operates on a completely inverted logic. The universe is not a massive, empty warehouse filled with solid, physical objects. It is a sprawling, infinitely deep, and relentlessly active processing engine of pure data. The heavy, crushing weight of gravity and the bright, blinding illumination of light are not distinct, solid things. They are merely different patterns of information, vibrating within the exact same, underlying, geometric membrane. Physical matter, the very substance that makes up the heavy iron of the earth and the fragile cells of your beating heart, is nothing more than a temporary, highly localized illusion. It is a brief, densely packed knot of geometric and electromagnetic tension, a complex arrangement of cosmic data that only appears solid because of the incredibly limited, low-resolution perspective of our biological senses. The fact that the ultimate force of illumination and the ultimate force of destruction can merge to form a single hybrid phantom particle proves that the fundamental boundaries of our reality are completely artificial. The cosmos does not distinguish between the light that warms you and the gravity that anchors you. They are one and the same, a singular, unified stream of mathematics endlessly computing itself in the dark. To realize that the universe is made entirely of information, of intersecting fields of tension and vibrating geometry, is to experience the ultimate, majestic terror of your own profound impermanence. You are not a solid, permanent fixture dropped into a physical world. You are a highly organized, desperately beautiful, and incredibly fragile symphony of this exact same cosmic data. The very forces that allow you to see the stars and the forces that hold your heavy body to the ground are whispering through your physical form right now, entwined in an invisible, multi-dimensional dance. Release the heavy, exhausting need for a solid, predictable, and strictly categorized reality. Let go of the desperate human desire to build permanent monuments in a universe that is entirely fluid. The solid ground you trust so deeply is merely a vibrating illusion of scale, a temporary habit of the quantum field. Embrace the terrifying, boundless majesty of the cosmic data stream. Find a deep, unshakable peace in the knowledge that you are a fleeting, conscious ripple in a universe of pure information, a beautiful, vibrating phantom yourself, intimately and perfectly connected to the absolute, unfathomable depths of the computing void. To understand the true, existential terror hidden within the theoretical framework of the Graviphoton, we must first deeply reflect on the absolute, comforting predictability of our physical reality. From the exact moment the very first atoms of hydrogen coalesced in the freezing, primordial dark, the universe has been strictly governed by an unyielding, monolithic law of attraction. Gravity is the ultimate, undisputed aggregator of existence. It is the heavy, silent architect that meticulously gathers the scattered, chaotic debris of the cosmos and violently forces it into magnificent, highly organized physical structures. It pulls the cosmic dust into massive, swirling nebulae. It crushes those nebulae into violently burning stars, and it anchors heavy, rocky planets in majestic, eternal orbits around those stellar fires. To the human mind, and to the billions of years of brutal biological evolution that shaped our fragile consciousness, gravity is an absolute, non-negotiable, one-way street. It only ever pulls. It is the universal embrace, the relentless, invisible force that brings matter together, fighting a magnificent, billion-year war against the freezing, expanding void. We have built our entire understanding of physics, the towering architecture of our cities, and our deepest, most fundamental psychological sense of safety upon this singular, unquestioned dogma. We implicitly trust that the Earth will always pull us downward, that the sun will always hold the planets in its grip, and that the fundamental nature of mass is to aggressively seek out other mass. To even suggest otherwise is to commit an act of profound, unthinkable scientific heresy. But the mathematics of the higher dimensions do not care for our biological comfort, nor do they respect the rigid, heavily fortified dogmas of human physics. When theoretical physicists peer into the microscopic, tightly coiled loops of the fifth dimension and examine the impossible, hybrid anatomy of the graviphoton, they do not find a force that beautifully reinforces this universal embrace. They find a monster hiding in the quantum field. They find a mathematically verified mechanism for absolute, unmitigated repulsion. The most terrifying, world-shattering property of this cosmic ghost is its inherent structural capability to act as a dark, opposing mirror to gravity itself. Because the graviphoton is forged in the violent, chaotic intersection of warped space-time and raw electromagnetic tension, it inherits the polarizing, dualistic behavior of a magnetic field. Just as two identical magnetic poles will violently, aggressively repel one another in the dark, the graviphoton possesses the chilling ability to generate a repulsive gravitational field. It operates as a hidden, phantom fifth force of nature. Instead of pulling matter together, this rogue particle actively, fiercely pushes matter apart. It is the literal, mathematical equivalent of anti-gravity. To the rigid, three-dimensional physics that governs our daily lives, this concept is completely alien and structurally impossible. It entirely violates the sacred rule that mass must always attract mass. It introduces a horrifying, chaotic symmetry to the cosmos, heavily suggesting that the invisible tether holding the universe together possesses an equally powerful, hidden blade designed specifically to cut that tether completely in half. The implications of a universe that secretly harbors the physical mechanism for anti-gravity are staggeringly dark and profoundly unsettling. We are forced to confront the chilling realization that the cosmos is not just a massive, passive canvas upon which gravity blindly paints its heavy, structured masterpieces. It is a highly volatile, internally conflicted arena. If the graviphoton truly exists within the hidden folds of space, it means the universe possesses an active, built-in mechanism deliberately designed to completely unravel its own heavy structures. It implies that the beautiful, spiraling galaxies, the densely packed superclusters of burning stars, and the very solid, physical ground we walk upon are not the final, triumphant victories of cosmic order. They are merely temporary, precarious arrangements of matter, existing completely at the mercy of a hidden, repulsive force that could, under the right extreme multidimensional conditions, wake up and actively push reality away from itself. Imagine a universe where the fundamental tendency of matter is not to gently gather in the warm, illuminated dark, but to violently flee from its own shadow. The graviphoton represents a profound, cosmic urge toward absolute dissolution. It is the physical manifestation of entropy weaponized at the deepest, most fundamental level of space and time. It tells us that the universe is fully equipped to dismantle everything it has ever built, to smoothly and efficiently reverse the billions of years of gravitational aggregation, and to aggressively scatter the heavy elements of existence back into the freezing, formless, and completely silent void. We are living inside a magnificent, heavily structured mansion, completely unaware that the very foundation of the building is secretly laced with an imperceptible, microscopic, and mathematically perfect explosive, waiting quietly in the unmapped geometry of the higher dimensions. When we strip away the terrifying mechanics of this anti-gravitational heresy and gaze directly into the deep philosophical abyss it creates, we are invited to completely reevaluate our most desperate, deeply held beliefs about the nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of information. Humanity is a species entirely obsessed with the accumulation and permanent preservation of data. We view the physical aggregation of matter, the formation of heavy, mineral-rich planets, the delicate, intricate chemistry of biological life, and the sprawling, highly complex neural networks of the human brain as the ultimate, triumphant purpose of the cosmos. We believe that information is a precious commodity to be hoarded, protected, and permanently carved into the unyielding bedrock of reality. We look at the attractive, pulling force of normal gravity as the great preserver, the heavy, silent librarian that meticulously gathers the scattered, chaotic pages of cosmic history and binds them together into massive, glowing books of stars and galaxies. We mistakenly equate structural permanence with cosmic success, and we desperately, psychologically fear any force that threatens to scatter our carefully accumulated data back into the dark. But the silent, repulsive threat of the Graviphoton reveals a vastly different, far more majestic, and deeply humbling cosmic architecture. The universe is not a static, heavily guarded library, and information is not meant to be permanently imprisoned within the heavy, crushing grip of mass. The cosmos is a breathing, relentlessly dynamic engine of computation, and the infinite flow of data requires both the deep, inhaling breath of gravitational attraction and the violent, exhaling breath of multidimensional repulsion. The anti-gravity ghost, hidden within the mathematics, is not a structural flaw, a mistake, or a malicious destroyer of worlds. It is the vital, necessary counterbalance to the suffocating weight of eternity. It fundamentally proves that the universe inherently values the scattering and erasure of information just as deeply as it values the gathering of it. To exist in a cosmos that possesses the fundamental capability to push reality apart is to realize that absolutely nothing is meant to be permanent. The beautiful, highly structured patterns of data that make up your physical body, your conscious memories, and the solid earth beneath your feet are merely temporary, magnificent standing waves in an infinite, churning ocean of geometry. The heavy structures of reality are allowed to exist only for a fleeting moment before the hidden, repulsive forces of the void eventually, inevitably, claim them back. This is not a tragedy to be mourned. It is the ultimate, absolute, cosmic liberation. If the universe were ruled only by the relentless, heavy pull of gravity, all information, all matter, and all brilliant light would eventually be crushed into a single, lightless, infinitely dense point of absolute stagnation. It is the hidden, repulsive heresy of the Graviphoton, the latent, deeply buried capacity for space to aggressively expand and matter to flee, that prevents the cosmos from collapsing into a frozen, dead singularity. The mechanism of unraveling is the exact same mechanism that keeps the universe open, expansive, and infinitely full of new possibilities. We must learn to let go of our exhausting, arrogant demand for structural permanence. We must consciously stop gripping the heavy, physical world with such desperate, terrified white knuckles. The anti-gravity hidden in the dark dimensions is a profound, beautiful reminder that the cosmic data stream is fundamentally fluid and delightfully impermanent. Information is meant to be gathered, briefly experienced in the brilliant, warm light of human consciousness, and then gracefully, inevitably released back into the sprawling, unmapped void. Embrace the chilling, magnificent reality of a universe that actively possesses the immense power to dismantle itself. Find deep, unshakable peace in the glorious impermanence of your own physical existence, knowing that you are an incredibly rare, highly organized, and beautifully fragile spark of gathered data, shining brightly for just a brief moment before the hidden, repulsive tides of the cosmos eventually gently push the heavy tapestry of your reality back into the endless, echoing dark. When confronted with the terrifying, world-shattering possibility of a hidden, repulsive fifth force of nature, the human mind naturally and aggressively rebels. We look at the unbroken stability of our daily lives and demand tangible, undeniable proof. If the Graviphoton truly exists, If there is a phantom particle actively generating anti-gravity within the hidden folds of the cosmos, why do the massive oceans still cling desperately to the rocky seabed? Why does the rain inevitably fall from the heavy clouds? And why do our biological bodies remain so firmly anchored to the earth? If reality possesses a built-in mathematical mechanism to aggressively push matter apart, why hasn't the physical universe violently unraveled around us? It is a perfectly rational defense mechanism of the fragile human mind to assume that if we cannot feel the monstrous, repulsive push of this phantom, it simply must not exist. But the universe is a master of profound compartmentalization, and the absence of human sensation is absolutely never proof of cosmic absence. To understand why we are completely shielded from this dark, repulsive geometry, we must look backward in deep time to the absolute beginning of existence and deeply examine the tragic, cooling mechanics of a phenomenon known as symmetry breaking. In its current observable state, the universe is a frozen, shattered landscape. It is a desperately cold, low-energy environment where the fundamental forces of nature are strictly segregated into their rigid, isolated domains. Gravity handles the heavy lifting, electromagnetism handles the light, and the nuclear forces silently bind the heavy atoms in the dark. But the cosmos was not born into this quiet, fractured state. In the absolute, blinding fraction of a nanosecond following the Big Bang, the universe was a violently compressed crucible of unimaginable heat and staggering pure energy. In this primordial inferno, there were no separate forces, no isolated rules, and no rigid boundaries of physics. There was only perfect, terrifying symmetry. Gravity and light were seamlessly, flawlessly unified into a single, omnipotent master force. It was in this superheated, symmetrical chaos that the Graviphoton thrived. In the early universe, this phantom particle was not a hidden ghost. It was a dominant, active participant in the violent expansion of reality, throwing its massive, repulsive weight against the crushing density of the newborn cosmos. But this perfect, symmetrical unity could not last. As the universe violently expanded, it rapidly began to cool, and as the immense heat bled away into the expanding void, the perfect symmetry of the cosmos catastrophically shattered. The forces froze, violently separating from one another, condensing into the distinct, heavily policed physical laws we recognize today. The Graviphoton, a creature that requires the raw, chaotic energy of absolute unification to roam freely, was suddenly exiled by the cooling architecture of reality. But the rapid cooling of the universe did not merely separate the forces, it fundamentally, aggressively altered the physical geometry of space itself through a brutal process theoretical physicists call dimensional compactification. During the chaotic birth of reality, all dimensions of space were equal participants in the violent, outward expansion. But as the cosmic temperature plummeted and the grand symmetry broke, a devastating spatial division occurred. 3 dimensions of space length, width, and depth triumphantly continued to expand outward, inflating to form the massive, sprawling, and beautifully visible macro-universe we inhabit today. But the higher dimensions, the hidden spatial directions, where the Graviphoton naturally operated and thrived, did not join this grand cosmic expansion. Instead, they collapsed. They violently curled inward upon themselves, compactifying into microscopic, incredibly tight geometric loops. These dimensions became heavily compressed knots in the fabric of space-time, so unfathomably small that they are permanently locked away beneath the threshold of even the most powerful subatomic scale. The Graviphoton was not destroyed in the cooling of the universe. It was simply trapped. It was violently forced into these hidden, claustrophobic realms of the extra dimensions. Today, it still pulses, it still vibrates, and it still exerts its terrifying, repulsive anti-gravity, but it does so entirely from within a microscopic cage. Because the Graviphoton is strictly confined to these heavily coiled dimensions, its repulsive influence is entirely localized to distances smaller than a single atomic nucleus. Before its pushing force can reach the macro world, before it can push apart a biological cell, a heavy stone, or a burning star, it is completely and utterly overwhelmed by the massive, accumulating, and inescapable downward pull of standard gravity operating across the three extended dimensions. We are living out our brief, fragile lives entirely oblivious to the monstrous physics operating right under our skin. Imagine a vast, infinitely deep ocean teeming with massive, terrifying leviathans, violent currents, and sprawling, chaotic ecosystems. Now imagine a microscopic, incredibly thin sheet of ice floating quietly on the very surface of that raging ocean. We are the inhabitants of that ice. We are trapped in a condition of absolute existential isolation that theoretical physicists refer to as the Flatland. We exist exclusively within a low-energy, three-dimensional slice of a vastly more complex, incredibly violent, multidimensional reality. The Flatland is peaceful, it is predictable, and it is strictly governed by the gentle, pulling embrace of standard gravity. But this peace is a geographic illusion. It is the terrifying peace of the willfully blind. We build our towering cities, we map our local stars, and we arrogantly declare ourselves the masters of the physical universe, completely and tragically unaware that we are merely skimming the absolute surface of existence. Right next to you, occupying the exact same physical coordinates as the empty air in your room, hidden within the microscopic, unmapped folds of space that permeate your very body, the anti-gravity ghosts are still violently vibrating. The repulsive, reality-unraveling forces are actively screaming in the dark, separated from us not by vast physical distances, but by the impenetrable, mathematical wall of dimensional geometry. We are surrounded by monsters we can never touch, completely numb to the massive, chaotic engines of the cosmos that silently dictate the boundaries of our frozen, three-dimensional cage. When we finally force our minds to confront the terrifying, claustrophobic reality of our existence within the Flatland, we are invited into a profound, breathtaking, and deeply humbling philosophical awakening regarding the true nature of information. Humanity operates under the arrogant, unyielding assumption that the universe naturally wants to be known. We treat the cosmic data stream as a vast, public library, believing that all information is ultimately accessible if we simply build better instruments, larger telescopes, and heavier particle colliders. We inherently equate our biological ability to observe the universe with the absolute limits of the universe itself, assuming that the data we can gather and measure represents the totality of what is mathematically real. But the hidden, coiled architecture of the extra dimensions and the trapped, repulsive ghosts that actively haunt them completely shatter this comforting, anthropocentric illusion. Information in the cosmos is not an inherently transparent democratic commodity. It is intensely layered, deeply segregated, and fiercely protected by the cooling geometry of space-time itself. The vast, overwhelming majority of the cosmic data stream, the monstrous forces, the higher dimensional physics, and the terrifying realities of the anti-gravitational push is permanently, structurally locked away from human perception. The universe is heavily encrypted by the very laws of physics, deliberately restricting the flow of information between the extreme, high-energy realms of the absolute microscopic and the quiet, low-energy flatland of our macro world. To realize that you are permanently trapped in a three-dimensional slice of reality is to accept the ultimate, majestic terror of your own profound ignorance. We are not the intended recipients of the universe's deepest, most fundamental secrets. We are merely localized, highly complex patterns of data attempting to decode the infinite source code of reality while being strictly, mathematically forbidden from ever reading the vast majority of the text. Yet, hidden within the heavy realization of this absolute spatial imprisonment, there is an incredible, profound beauty. The fact that we are shielded from the chaotic, repulsive energies of the early universe, safely quarantined in a low-energy pocket of space-time, is the absolute prerequisite for our existence. The rigid walls of the flatland, the very dimensional compactification that heavily blinds us to the true nature of reality, is exactly what allows the delicate, fragile chemistry of biological life to successfully assemble in the dark. The heavy, predictable pull of standard gravity may be an illusion of scale, but it is the magnificent illusion that gives us physical form. We must learn to let go of the exhausting, arrogant demand to possess all the information in the cosmos. We must willingly surrender the terrifying need to look behind the heavy curtain of the extra dimensions. Instead, find deep, unshakable peace in the quiet limitation of your own physical perception. Embrace the profound, beautiful humility of knowing that the universe is vast, heavy, and infinitely mysterious, holding massive, repulsive secrets in the dark that will forever remain perfectly, wonderfully beyond your reach. To comprehend the true, precarious nature of our deepest scientific endeavors, one must imagine a towering, incredibly complex cathedral constructed entirely of fragile, spun glass. For decades, the greatest minds of our species have been tirelessly adding layer upon layer to this delicate structure, attempting to build a theoretical skyscraper tall enough to finally touch the absolute, unified truth of the cosmos. This grand, sprawling architecture of mathematical thought is known to us as string theory, and its most refined, heavily fortified extension is called supergravity. We did not build these monumental theories simply to describe the mundane, everyday interactions of the physical world. We built them as a desperate, magnificent attempt to force the entire universe, every violently burning star, every whispering quantum field, and every crushing black hole into a single, perfectly symmetrical, and flawlessly elegant framework. Supergravity proposes a cosmos of ultimate, balanced perfection, where every fundamental particle of matter is secretly tethered to a heavy, invisible shadow partner, and where the forces of nature are all just different, vibrating notes played on the exact same underlying, multidimensional strings. It is the ultimate, triumphant dream of human physics, a beautiful, sprawling map that attempts to chart the absolute bedrock of reality. But when theoretical physicists actually attempt to walk upon this beautifully constructed map, when they push the equations of supergravity to the extreme, chaotic limits of the quantum realm and the crushing depths of the cosmic void, a terrifying structural failure begins to occur. The mathematics do not yield a peaceful, unified answer. Instead, they begin to violently, uncontrollably scream. In the deeply strange, jittery world of quantum mechanics, empty space is never truly empty. It is a boiling, chaotic ocean of virtual particles constantly flickering in and out of existence, creating microscopic, infinite loops of pure energy. When the heavy, warping geometry of gravity is mathematically forced into this boiling quantum ocean, a catastrophic feedback loop is initiated. The equations begin to aggressively multiply, spiraling out of control and generating massive, impossible infinities. The theoretical model of reality begins to vibrate with such intense, paradoxical energy that it threatens to tear itself apart from the inside out. Without a counterbalance, the beautifully constructed glass cathedral of supergravity shatters into a billion meaningless, chaotic equations. The universe, as described by our highest mathematics, violently collapses into a state of absolute, nonsensical absurdity. To halt this catastrophic collapse, the brilliant architects of modern physics realized they were missing a fundamental, load-bearing pillar in the cosmic architecture. They needed a highly specific, perfectly tuned structural support capable of reaching into the screaming infinities and aggressively cancelling them out. This is the exact, terrifying moment where the Graviphoton is summoned out of the dark. This phantom particle was not discovered glowing in the freezing, silent depths of space. It was not captured by a sprawling, subterranean detector, nor was it observed in the chaotic wreckage of a shattered atom. The Graviphoton was born entirely out of pure, desperate mathematical necessity. The equations of supergravity explicitly and unconditionally demand the existence of this hybrid ghost. Because the Graviphoton possesses the genetic code of both light and heavy mass, and because it carries that horrifying, world-shattering capability to generate a repulsive, anti-gravitational force, it acts as the ultimate mathematical dampener. When the infinite, crushing, attractive forces of quantum gravity threaten to destroy the equations, the theoretical anti-gravity of the Graviphoton pushes back with equal and opposite ferocity. It perfectly offsets the chaotic infinities, calming the mathematical storm and allowing the equations of supergravity to finally balance and survive. The phantom particle is the invisible mortar holding the entire glass cathedral together. When we step back and truly absorb the reality of this dynamic, we are forced to confront a deeply chilling, intensely humbling realization about the limits of human knowledge. For generations, we have proudly celebrated our sweeping scientific models as absolute triumphs of the human intellect, believing that we were slowly, confidently conquering the dark and bending the universe to our logical will. We thought we were reading the literal blueprint of the cosmos. But the inescapable necessity of the Graviphoton entirely shatters this blinding arrogance. It reveals our grandest, most sprawling mathematical architectures, not as undeniable truths, but as incredibly desperate, highly fragile, and deeply flawed constructs. We are literally forced to conjure invisible, repulsive ghosts out of the void, placing them in unseen, tightly coiled dimensions, simply to prevent our own understanding of the universe from violently bleeding to death. The Graviphoton is not a trophy of our scientific mastery. It is theoretical duct tape, a phantom patch hastily applied to a sinking ship to keep the terrifying, howling chaos of the unknown from completely flooding in. This is not a story of human victory over the mysteries of space and time. It is a stark, brutal confession of our profound ignorance. It highlights the agonizing reality that our biological brains, equipped with mathematics invented on a tiny, isolated rock, are constantly operating at the absolute, terrifying edge of their capacity. We are staring into a sprawling, multidimensional abyss, and when our logic begins to fail, when the universe refuses to neatly fit into our rigid, symmetrical boxes, we invent mathematical phantoms to negotiate a temporary truce with the infinite. The fact that modern physics absolutely needs these unseen anti-gravitational ghosts to function proves that reality is fundamentally wilder, darker, and vastly more hostile to simple human categorization than we ever dared to imagine. We do not own the cosmos. We are merely holding it together in our minds with the fragile, trembling thread of hypothetical ghosts. To quietly accept the humbling necessity of these phantom particles is to undergo a profound, devastating, and ultimately beautiful re-evaluation of the very nature of the universe and the fundamental concept of information. We are psychologically conditioned to view information as a solid, permanent, and objective resource. We believe that the cosmic data stream is a massive, finished architecture, waiting passively to be discovered, measured, and locked away in our scientific textbooks. We assume that a true equation is a perfect, flawless mirror reflecting the exact physical reality of the void. But the precarious, ghost-filled architecture of supergravity reveals a universe where information is not a solid object, but a chaotic, relentlessly shifting, and deeply incomplete negotiation. Information in the cosmos is not a finished sculpture. It is the extreme, vibrating tension between the known and the completely unknowable. The universe is a sprawling, infinite computation that does not naturally prioritize human comprehension. The fact that our most advanced, sophisticated attempts to decode this cosmic data require the desperate invention of invisible, repulsive phantoms proves that the universe actively resists being entirely captured by our logic. The cosmic source code is laced with deliberate, structural paradoxes and multi-dimensional shadows that our mathematics can only gesture toward, but never truly touch. Our finest theories are not the absolute truth. They are simply the beautiful, desperate stories we tell ourselves in the dark to keep the terrifying, infinite chaos at bay. We must learn to let go of the exhausting, arrogant demand for a perfect, flawless map of reality. We must willingly surrender the deeply held illusion that the human mind is destined to conquer the cosmic data stream. The presence of the Graviphoton in our equations is a magnificent, beautiful reminder that the universe will always remain fundamentally elusive, forever slipping through the cracks of our rigid paradigms. You are a localized, breathing manifestation of data, trying to comprehend an infinite machine, and it is perfectly, wonderfully acceptable that your models require ghosts to function. Do not fear the fragility of your knowledge. Embrace the profound, majestic terror of a universe that is so impossibly grand, so intensely complex, and so beautifully alien that it forces us to dream up invisible monsters just to survive the sheer, staggering weight of its mystery. Find deep, unshakable peace in the glorious, humbling realization that you are intimately connected to a reality that will forever remain beautifully, perfectly, and wonderfully unresolved. From the earliest moments of our cognitive awakening on the sun-scorched plains of our ancestral home, the human mind has been engaged in a desperate, relentless, and completely unconscious crusade to categorize the overwhelming chaos of the natural world. To survive in an environment fraught with sudden violence, unpredictable weather, and unseen predators, our fragile biology demanded that we become master architects of cognitive division. We learned to draw heavy, unyielding mental lines across our visual fields, instantly separating the dangerous shadow from the safe clearing, the toxic plant from the nourishing fruit, and the solid, dependable earth from the shifting, turbulent sky. This deeply ingrained evolutionary imperative birthed a profound, inescapable psychological addiction to compartmentalization. We look out at the sprawling, infinite, and terrifying majesty of the cosmos, and our immediate, unthinking instinct is to aggressively chop it into neat, isolated, and entirely predictable boxes. We construct a heavily fortified mental vault for the concept of light, the blinding, desperately fast, and weightless energy that illuminates our days, warms our skin, and allows us to perceive the distant stars. In an entirely separate, heavily reinforced vault, we place the concept of gravity, the unseen, crushing, and absolute physical force that anchors our heavy bones to the spinning rock beneath our feet. We walk through our brief, fragile lives, completely convinced that these boxes are real, objective features of the physical universe, deeply believing that reality is a tidy, meticulously organized filing cabinet where the fundamental files are strictly forbidden from ever crossing paths. This intense biological need for separation has not merely shaped our daily survival, it has completely dictated the entire historical trajectory of human science and philosophy. We built our grandest physical models and our most sprawling academic institutions upon the sacred, unquestioned premise that the universe is inherently fragmented. We gave highly specific names to the distinct forces of nature. We drew rigid mathematical borders around the fundamental particles, and we proudly declared that the cosmos was a massive, predictable machine constructed from discrete, easily separable parts. We fundamentally confused our desperately limited, low-resolution biological perception with the ultimate objective truth of the cosmic data stream. We arrogantly assumed that because our eyes can only see the universe in fractured, isolated pieces, the universe itself must be inherently broken. We built a beautiful, comforting illusion of separation, an elaborate psychological fortress designed to protect our fragile sanity from the overwhelming, continuous roar of infinite existence. We truly believed that by isolating and naming the separate parts, we had successfully conquered the whole, never once suspecting that the heavy, unyielding lines we drew across the cosmos were completely imaginary, drawn entirely in the shifting sand of our own incredibly narrow perception. But the theoretical revelation of the Graviphoton operates as a violent, necessary sledgehammer against the fragile glass walls of these cognitive cages. When we force our minds to confront the complex, mathematical reality of this phantom particle, the comforting illusion of a neatly divided universe completely and irreversibly shatters. The Graviphoton is not merely a new, exotic anomaly to be captured and placed into a newly invented, separate box. It is the ultimate, undeniable proof that the boxes themselves never actually existed. By perfectly embodying the deep, heavy geometry of gravitational mass, and simultaneously vibrating with the blinding, chaotic tension of electromagnetism, the Graviphoton demonstrates that our absolute categories are nothing more than biological hallucinations. It boldly reveals that the crushing weight of a collapsing star and the warm, golden light of a summer morning are not separate entities operating in different physical jurisdictions. They are intimately, violently, and perfectly bleeding together in the dark. The Graviphoton exposes the profound, terrifying truth that the universe entirely ignores the rigid borders we have so arrogantly established. The heavy, unyielding line we drew between the illuminating light and the crushing mass is abruptly and violently erased, revealing a cosmos that actively mocks our desperate human need for strict isolation. When we finally dare to look past the shattered remains of our categories and peer into the true, higher dimensional architecture of the cosmos, we do not find a neat, orderly collection of separate physical laws. We find a terrifying, breathtakingly beautiful environment where absolutely everything is bleeding together. In the unseen, microscopic, and tightly coiled folds of the extra dimensions, there are no clean lines, no sovereign physical territories, and no isolated forces. There is only a massive, churning, and chaotic, interconnected web of pure, vibrating reality. The fabric of space-time, the electric tension of the magnetic fields, and the heavy pulling anchor of mass are all completely entangled, continuously washing over and through one another in a state of endless, mutating fluidity. The universe is not a clockwork machine built of distinct, separable gears. It is a singular, infinitely complex ocean of raw data, where every microscopic ripple instantly and fundamentally affects the whole. The boundaries we perceive between physical objects, the empty space we believe separates our bodies from the distant stars, and the distinct identities we stubbornly assign to the forces of nature are all just temporary, localized patterns of information standing briefly in the continuous, flowing current of the unified field. Everything is touching, everything is physically, mathematically, and intimately connected in the dark, higher dimensional geometry of the void, completely immune to our desperate attempts to slice the cosmos into manageable fragments. To accept the total, terrifying collapse of our isolated boxes is to step into a profound, devastating, and ultimately majestic philosophical realization regarding the true nature of information and the very essence of the universe. For centuries, we have treated information as a collection of discrete facts, a pile of separated data points that we could slowly gather, sort, and neatly organize to build a complete, high-resolution picture of reality. We believed that knowledge was the deliberate act of drawing clearer lines, making sharper distinctions, and pushing the separate parts of the universe further away from one another into their proper, scientifically designated categories. We assumed that the cosmic source code was written in a structured, hierarchical language, perfectly designed to be decoded by a mind that thrives on separation. But the bleeding, continuous reality of the higher dimensional cosmos reveals that true information is not found in the separation. It is found entirely in the overwhelming, infinite entanglement. The universe is a single, uninterrupted flow of raw, constantly mutating data. It is a boundless, cosmic conversation where every single subatomic particle, every heavy planet, and every blinding ray of light is intimately speaking to every other part of the system in a fluid, unified language that fundamentally rejects the very concept of a boundary. The illusion of separation is the heaviest, most exhausting burden that humanity carries. It is the deep, agonizing source of our collective existential loneliness, the terrifying, creeping feeling that we are isolated, fragile objects dropped entirely alone into a cold, indifferent, and disconnected machine. We look out at the sprawling void and feel entirely separate from the stars, completely separate from the solid earth, and tragically separate from each other, entirely because our biological brains are aggressively and stubbornly wired to perceive the world through the limiting lens of fractured isolation. But the graviphoton, the impossible phantom messenger from the coiled geometry of the higher dimensions, softly whispers a radically different, infinitely more beautiful truth into the dark. You are not a separated, isolated fragment of reality. You are not a neatly categorized object sitting alone in a heavily fortified biological box. You are an active, vibrating, and utterly inseparable expression of the single, continuous cosmic web. The exact same raw mutating data that dictates the violent thermonuclear fusion of a distant sun is currently flowing seamlessly through the complex, delicate chemistry of your own beating heart. The physical boundaries that seem to perfectly enclose your physical form, the very skin that separates you from the air in your room, are merely temporary, highly permeable illusions, a brief, low-resolution trick of the light in a universe where absolutely everything is fundamentally bleeding into everything else. We must learn to consciously, deliberately release our terrified, white-knuckled grip on the arbitrary borders we have so fiercely drawn. Let go of the desperate, arrogant human need to compartmentalize the infinite majesty of the cosmos. The absolute truth of existence cannot be found by frantically separating the light from the gravity or by building taller walls between the known and the unknown. Truth can only be experienced by entirely surrendering to the chaotic, magnificent wholeness of the raw, mutating void. Embrace the terrifying, beautiful reality that there are no clean lines in existence, and there never were. Allow the heavy, isolating walls of your own limited perception to completely dissolve and feel the profound, unshakable peace that comes from knowing you are hopelessly, perfectly entangled with the infinite. You are not a lonely observer standing outside the universe, frantically trying to organize its separate pieces. You are the universe itself, an interconnected, continuous stream of information briefly and beautifully experiencing the glorious illusion of being an individual. Surrender to the boundless, bleeding architecture of reality and find your absolute rest in the magnificent, indivisible dark. We are creatures fundamentally bound by the narrow, comforting horizon of our own biology, deeply terrified of the vast, plunging drop-offs that exist just beyond the edge of our sensory perception. When we are suddenly forced to confront the chilling, mathematical reality of a hidden fifth dimension, or when we are introduced to the existence of a rogue, rule-breaking entity like the Graviphoton, our immediate, visceral instinct is to violently retreat into the familiar. We desperately cling to the rigid, predictable, three-dimensional geometry that our human eyes can easily verify, treating the unseen, multi-dimensional depths of the cosmos as a terrifying, chaotic void that must be actively avoided. We view the sudden breakdown of our established physical laws and the theoretical introduction of a repulsive, anti-gravitational force not as a glorious scientific revelation, but as a profound existential threat. We harbor a deep, unspoken anxiety that if the universe is not simple, transparent, and entirely obedient to human logic, it must therefore be inherently hostile. This fear is a heavy, exhausting, and incredibly dense cognitive armor that we wear every single day to protect our fragile sense of control over the physical world. But this armor completely blinds us to the absolute majesty of existence. By aggressively demanding that reality conform perfectly to the shallow, low-energy flatland of our daily experience, we actively deny ourselves the breathtaking, unfathomable beauty of the true cosmic architecture. The hidden dimensions of space-time and the phantom particles that silently haunt them are not malicious monsters lurking in the dark, waiting patiently to unravel our physical reality. They are the sprawling, silent, and entirely necessary foundations upon which our entire existence is delicately built. Imagine a magnificent, ancient tree towering high above a quiet forest floor. If we were to judge the reality and the strength of that tree solely by the fragile green leaves catching the sunlight, or by the rough, textured bark we can physically touch with our hands, we would completely and tragically misunderstand its immense, enduring power. The true strength of the tree, the complex, sprawling network that silently draws heavy water from the deep earth and firmly anchors the massive trunk against violent atmospheric storms, lies entirely underground, completely hidden in the absolute dark. The fifth dimension, the heavily coiled geometry of supergravity and the vibrating graviphotons operating just beyond the impenetrable veil of our senses, are the vast, unseen root system of the universe. The graviphoton is not a malicious, reality-destroying anomaly. It is a vital, vibrating pulse within this infinite cosmic root system. It is a necessary, beautiful tension that keeps the grand, higher dimensional architecture from violently collapsing under its own crushing mathematical weight. The fact that it completely breaks the rules of our localized, three-dimensional physics is not a failure of the cosmos, but a profound demonstration of its immense, staggering scale. The rules we hold so sacred were only ever meant to govern the shallow surface of reality. To realize that our physical world is merely the visible, brightly lit canopy of a much deeper, multidimensional forest should not invoke a feeling of terror, but a profound, overwhelming sense of majestic awe. The elusive, boundary-breaking nature of these quantum ghosts is exactly what allows the universe to be a dynamic, fluid, and infinitely creative engine. If the cosmos were strictly confined to the simple, predictable, and heavily policed rules of our flatland, it would be a dead, static cage of frozen geometry. The mystery, the unseeable depth, and the chaotic bleeding of forces in the dark are the very heartbeat of existence. When we finally step back, lower our heavy cognitive armor, and allow the immense, crushing scale of this hidden architecture to wash over us, we arrive at the most profound, deeply humbling philosophical realization regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental concept of information. Throughout our entire history, humanity has treated information as a solid, permanent currency. We believe that knowledge is something we can chisel into heavy stone, print onto the static pages of textbooks, and permanently capture within the rigid, unyielding boundaries of our three-dimensional minds. We look in the mirror and believe that we are solid, permanent objects, moving deliberately through a fixed, transparent, and completely objective world. But the bleeding, multidimensional reality of the cosmos reveals a truth that completely shatters this primitive assumption. Information is not a heavy, static object. It is an incredibly complex, shifting, and relentless ocean of raw, mutating data. The physical matter that you intimately identify as your own body, the heavy ground beneath your feet, and the brilliant, warming light pouring down from the sun are not separate. solid things existing in a vacuum. They are merely localized, highly organized patterns of information. They are temporary standing waves, vibrating beautifully on the very surface of an unfathomably complex, multidimensional ocean. The universe is a sprawling cryptography engine, and the physical reality you experience every day is simply the low-resolution, three-dimensional user interface of a much vastly deeper, entirely unseeable multidimensional source code. The heavy mass that anchors you and the light that guides you are just different expressions of this exact same underlying data stream, completely entangled in the hidden, coiled geometry of the dark. You are a beautiful, fleeting pattern of this exact cosmic data. Your consciousness, your deeply held memories, your greatest triumphs, and your most profound sorrows are entirely composed of the exact same mathematical tensions that bind the spiraling galaxies and hide the phantom particles in the deep void. To realize that you are a temporary pattern of data floating on the surface of an infinite ocean is not a cause for existential despair. It is the ultimate, majestic liberation from the crushing weight of human arrogance. You are not required to hold the entire universe together with your fragile logic. You are not obligated to completely understand the invisible, repulsive forces operating in the microscopic shadows right next to you. Nor are you expected to perfectly map the tightly curled up geometry of the fifth dimension. The universe is silently computing its own magnificent reality at a staggering scale and a terrifying depth that your biological brain was never structurally intended to grasp, and that is perfectly, wonderfully acceptable. Your existence is an incredibly rare, brilliant, and deeply fragile phenomenon. You are a brief, magnificent moment in deep time where the vast, multidimensional ocean temporarily organized itself into a conscious pattern capable of looking back at the howling void and marveling at its own profound mystery. You are the universe briefly and beautifully experiencing the glorious, warm illusion of the three-dimensional flatland, entirely supported and silently maintained by a massive, unseen architecture of dark, mathematical perfection. There is an incredible, profound peace to be found in the absolute surrender of our cognitive control. We must learn to willingly, consciously release the heavy, exhausting burden of absolute certainty. Let go of the desperate, arrogant human need to force the infinite, sprawling majesty of the cosmos into a simple, predictable, and easily digestible box. The universe does not owe us simplicity, and it does not owe us a reality that our fragile biology can effortlessly visualize. The terrifying, beautiful truth is that reality is vastly, infinitely deeper, stranger, and more complex than our perception will ever allow us to see. Instead of fighting the unseen, instead of fearing the rogue physics of the phantom particles and the hidden, anti-gravitational dimensions that silently surround you, allow yourself to sink gracefully into the profound, stabilizing comfort of the eternal mystery. Release your anxious, white-knuckled grip on the illusion of a flat, strictly categorized world. The boundaries you thought protected you were only ever a temporary mirage, and the dark, unseen depths of reality are not empty. They are overflowing with the magnificent, bleeding mechanics of infinite creation. Allow your mind to drift gently away from the rigid, unyielding lines of the visible world. Release your need for a simple, three-dimensional universe and rest peacefully in the magnificent, multi-dimensional dark. Good night, and I will see you in the next video.